This video's topic is social structure and social interaction. Let's start off with social structure. Social structure refers to social patterns that help us interact with one another. The two main components are social status and role. So with a status, that refers to any social position that you hold in society. So we have multiple social statuses that we hold at any given time, and they can change throughout our lifetime. They are things that we give social significance to. Things like mother, father, any type of family title is a social status. Also your occupation. Our society puts a lot of emphasis on your occupation, so that is a social status. Also any type of achievement that you have that we put a title on, saying a high school graduate, college graduate. So those are some examples of statuses. Now, under that term, there are some specific terms related to what type of statuses that you're holding. There are ascribed statuses, which refer to any social position that you have been placed into. You have very little control over an ascribed status. So these are things like your gender is an ascribed status, your race or ethnicity, being a daughter or son. That is something that you have no control over. So it is considered an ascribed status. The other side of that is what's called an achieved status. These are statuses that you earn, that you do put effort into achieving that position. This would be high school graduate, college graduate, your occupation. Those are all things that take effort, and they're called an achieved status. We also have what's called a master status. And most of us have a master status. This is one of your social positions that you hold that tends to overshadow all of the other ones. And it actually affects people's behavior. Things like being a professional athlete or movie star would be considered that individual's master status. When you see somebody who's famous out at, say, a restaurant, it's hard to think of them as a spouse or a daughter or a son or a grandparent, depending on who it is, of course, that you just see them as that famous person. Now, an example of how it affects your behavior is you see them at the restaurant, and it's really difficult for you to not approach them and ask them for an autograph. So another example would be our politicians. Those would be a master status for those individuals. It's difficult for us to see, the president in any other light than the president, or to think of, a congressman as a grandparent. So those are some examples of a master status. Now, those are kind of extreme examples. Before I leave that topic, let me just give you one more on, a daily interaction that us non-famous people might interact with. If you have a disability, that can be a master status. If you're a preacher at a church, that can be a master status. If you're a doctor, so those are some examples where that one particular status tends to overshadow all of the other ones that you also hold. All right, now let's move on to role. This is the expectations associated with a social status. So the status refers to your position. Role refers to the expectations associated with that position. So let's use college student as our example. College student is your social status. Now the role includes several different things because we're talking about multiple expectations. You are expected to attend class or log in regularly to your online classes. You are expected to turn assignments and exams in on time. You're expected to read the textbook, study for exams, all while maintaining scholastic honesty. You're not supposed to cheat. You're not supposed to share work. You're not supposed to plagiarize. All of those things represent your role as a college student. Now, talking about role, there's a couple of different problems that can occur within a role. Two terms, role conflict and role strain. Sometimes these can get confusing, but I'm going to try to make it simple by just focusing on the fact that role conflict refers to a problem that you're having with two or more statuses, And role strain refers to a conflict with just one status. So let's talk about college instructor as our example. And we will first talk about it as just one single status. So the example I'm going to be giving, because it's only one status, college student, this is going to be an example of role strain. You're expected to turn things on time and maintain scholastic honesty. But what if you're coming up to the deadline of the term paper and you have done nothing towards it? You're starting to get stressed about the time constraints, and you are quite tempted to plagiarize. That would be considered an example of role strain, that you're having conflict within the expectation of one single status. Now, an example of role conflict is between two or more statuses. So let's stick with the example of you as a college student, but let's add in another social status of parent. Now, that's two social statuses, college student and parent. Now, let's talk about a few expectations with parent to make this point. You're expected to love and nurture and care for your children. And you're also supposed to be Dr. Mom or Dr. Dad sometimes when you don't think they need to go to the doctor, or it's prior to you actually taking them to the doctor. So let's say that you are taking a seated class and it's exam day. You're supposed to be at the college at 11 o'clock to take your exam. Well, at 10 o'clock, you have a call from the school. You have to go pick up your daughter or son who is violently throwing up. So now you have the conflict, the role conflict, because we're talking about two or more statuses, between that of parent, of caring for your sick child, and that of college student, that you're supposed to be taking an exam within an hour and you're probably not going to make it. Okay, now let's move on to some concepts and theories related to social interaction. Now, this is really interesting. This is based on the Symbolic Interactionist theory, which is my favorite between the three main theories. Remember, we've talked about functionalism, interactionism, and conflict theory. So referring back to those three main theories, symbolic interactionism argues that our daily interactions are a huge part of our behavior, that our interactions with people create and affect our behavior. Well, that's basically the gist of social construction of reality, is that our daily interactions are creating our reality and how we view the world, and how we view people, how we view items, how we view ourselves. Some examples would be, you could look at this cross-culturally and say, if you've got maybe a tribal community somewhere, and you compare a person from there to maybe a person from New York City, and you just look at maybe how they dress, how they talk, how they interact, what they value, their attitudes, their behaviors, you would be able to easily identify the fact that their cultural surroundings and the people that they interact with have created their sense of reality. Now, let's talk about it in just a one country setting, where let's say you're comparing two different parts of the United States. I grew up in Oklahoma, and I can tell you, growing up in Oklahoma, that trucks are extremely important there. So are cowboy hats and boots. Now, you look at New York City, and a lot of people there don't even own a car at all, and definitely would not consider having a truck as something of importance. Same thing with cowboy hat and boots. Not a common style of dress that you might find in New York City, but actually very common in Oklahoma and some other southern states. Okay, let me give you another example on just maybe our daily interactions and how that creates our sense of reality. Have you ever taken a test, let's say in a seated class, and you leave feeling like you did pretty good, that it was a pretty easy test? You walk out, and there's other students who have finished the test before you, and they're in the hallway talking about how hard the exam was and how tricky the questions were and that the wording was really difficult. Does that make you stop and think, maybe I thought it was an easy test. Maybe I wasn't really catching the fact that it was tricky, and maybe they're right and I'm wrong. So that's an example of where just your interaction with people can change your perspective of how you view something. All right, another fun way to study social behavior is a theory called Ethno Methodology. And this is a process of studying behavior and how people try to get you back into normalcy. It is the idea that you are going to purposely break a social rule and then look to see how people react. So, for example, you could, as a college student, take notes with a crayon. Take a box of crayons with you to class next time you go to class, and instead of taking out a pen or pencil to take notes, use a crayon. See if anybody offers you a pen or pencil. That's their way of trying to get you back into normal behavior. See if anybody says anything to you like, what, you got your child's backpack by mistake this morning? Another example would be take a Bible and prominently put it on your desk. You'd be surprised how that can affect people's behavior. People will try to bring you back into normal expectations, the expectations that you don't mix your college education with your religion, that they would, probably avoid you, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe they would engage in a religious conversation with you. But generally speaking, Bibles on the corner of your desk are not considered the appropriate expectations for a college student. Okay, there's one more theory I want to talk about, and it is Erving Goffman's dramaturgical analysis. And the beginning of that title is the word drama, and that's the premise of the basic premise of his theory, is he argues we are all social actors in a stage play, that your status is your character, your role is your script, each social situation you're involved in is a different scene, and there's different expectations, and we hold different, we have different characters and different scripts for each of those different scenes. An example would be when you're at your grandma's house, there's a scene, you are in the character of grandchild, and your script is controlled demeanor. You're talking nicely to your grandma. You're being, of course, respectful. You're not cussing. You're not. Maybe you might even have a different costume on. Maybe you're dressed more conservatively than you would if you were in. Now let's change the scene to you going out to have a drink with your friends. Your costume would be different. Your dress would be different. Your script would be different. You might cuss around your friends. I don't know. It would just be a totally different type of interaction in those two different settings. You can compare some other examples of some different scenes, different settings where your behavior would be noticeably different. Would be at a football game versus a church service, or versus a college classroom. So Erving Goffman's theory is focusing on the fact that we are all actors, and we do put on a play, that when we're in these other situations, we may not be quite as genuine as when we are around your friends and family. So, as always, I hope this video was helpful.